I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
I remember a very lovely air stewardess looking after me. I was all over the place, just getting through lots of tissues and crying and crying. And then I thought, look, I've got to get a grip here and do something useful for Diana.
Okay, so just 3 weeks before Princess Diana's tragic death in Paris, this was not a casual finding. Charles Spencer had spent 2 entire days working with top forensic document examiners from the London Probate Archives to verify every single ink stroke and pressure point of Diana's distinct black rollerball handwriting before uttering a single word to the public. If you want to stay informed on every major protocol shift and historical revelation inside the royal household, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss an update. The visual scene behind those closed doors in Northamptonshire carried an undeniable weight of quiet history. The morning light filtered through the high glass panes, illuminating decades of collected Spencer family records, but all attention remained fixed entirely on that single sheet of paper. Charles Spencer did not move quickly or raise his voice. He sat silently as the forensic examiner finished placing the final authentication stamp on the verification certificate, confirming that the manuscript was an absolute, untampered original created by Diana's own hand during her final summer. Every letter, every margin note, and every underlined phrase was systematically cataloged against the family repository. The atmosphere inside the room was defined by a cold, sobering reality. Once this document entered the public domain, the standard narrative pushed by court historians and palace press officers for over 30 years would be permanently dismantled. What made this discovery immediately cause widespread panic across Buckingham Palace was not merely the presence of Diana's signature, but the astonishing truth written upon the page regarding the genuine relationship between Princess Diana and Princess Anne. For 3 decades, royal biographers and media outlets presented a consistent narrative claiming that the 2 women were distant rivals who actively avoided each other behind palace doors. The public was told that Diana's media-savvy, emotionally expressive style clashed completely with Anne's traditional, no-nonsense, work-first approach to public duty. This hidden letter proved the exact opposite. During the absolute darkest period of her marital separation, when the traditional aristocracy had largely turned its back on her and central court officials were systematically limiting her movements, Diana turned directly to Princess Anne as her primary source of institutional guidance, sanctuary, and protection. Addressing her simply as Anne with striking personal intimacy, Diana poured out her deepest, most terrifying fears about the cold administrative machinery closing in on her young sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. She wrote explicitly that Princess Anne was the only human being in the entire Windsor household who possessed the raw, unyielding courage to stand against the central palace bureaucracy and defend her children's emotional survival. The language was direct, calculated, and entirely devoid of superficial court pleasantries. Diana stripped away the public titles and addressed the king's sister not as a distant royal figure, but as a mother and a fierce protector capable of confronting the household administration when no one else dared to speak up. Behind the closed doors of Clarence House, the arrival of a high-resolution photocopy delivered by Charles Spencer's legal team triggered immediate and absolute chaos within the palace legal department. Senior solicitors spent a breathless night scouring the 1993 Royal Trust Acts and related constitutional frameworks, desperate to find statutory grounds to file an urgent injunction and block the letter from reaching global news outlets. But their legal maneuvers hit an immediate brick wall. Because the physical manuscript was discovered within the private family archives of Althorp House and was addressed to a private individual rather than a state official, the Crown had zero constitutional authority to suppress its publication. The legal team had to deliver the humiliating news directly to the King's chief advisors that they were utterly powerless to stop the document from being made public. Distributional dynamics within the royal legal apparatus quickly began to fracture as senior officials realized the sheer extent of their powerlessness. The document was an unassailable private artifact, legally preserved under Spencer estate protocols, and no administrative lever existed within modern English law to halt its release without provoking an even more catastrophic public exposure. The senior solicitor sat at the long conference table at Clarence House in complete silence, realizing that every attempt to invoke Crown privilege would only validate the letter's contents in the eyes of the global press. The specific contents of the manuscript explained exactly why the palace legal team scrambled so frantically through the night. Diana revealed in explicit detail that she had uncovered a leaked administrative document from inside the palace registry office just 48 hours before sitting down to write to Anne. That confidential document outlined a systematic plan by senior court officials to alter her global security arrangements, reduce her personal protection detail to a minimum level, and restrict her operational independence. She referred to this coordinated effort as an administrative trap designed by senior courtiers who aimed to utilize ancient legal provisions within the 1772 Royal Marriages Act to establish this institutional leverage over her daily life and assert overriding authority regarding the residence, education, and public movements of William and Harry. This leaked document was not merely a set of administrative suggestions. It represented a structural strategy designed to enforce full institutional compliance. Senior court officers had quietly analyzed how best to isolate Diana's operational footprint following her formal divorce, recognizing that her global media reach posed a perpetual challenge to the central monarchy's message control. By targeting her protection detail and utilizing formal custody provisions embedded within centuries-old statutory frameworks, the palace establishment sought to construct a boundary line that Diana could neither cross nor legally challenge without risking total severance from her children's daily lives. Diana's discovery of these internal briefings transformed her lingering anxiety into immediate tactical defensive action. Fearing that her operational window was rapidly closing, Diana chose to completely bypass the standard palace mail system at Kensington Palace, knowing that central household officials monitored her routine correspondence. She engaged a highly confidential informal delivery route, ordering her most trusted personal chauffeur to drive the envelope directly to the equestrian stables at Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's private estate in Gloucestershire. The letter was handed directly to Anne's head groom under strict instructions of absolute secrecy, ensuring that palace screening clerks and administrative staff never touched the envelope or logged its transmission in the central mail registry. The mechanics of this covert transmission highlighted the extent to which trust had broken down between Diana and the central palace household. The chauffeur traveled along secondary rural routes across the English countryside, deliberately avoiding standard transport hubs where security personnel might take note of his journey. Upon arriving at the quiet stables at Gatcombe Park, he delivered the sealed, light blue envelope directly into the hands of the head groom, who placed it immediately into Princess Anne's personal leather desk tray inside her private quarters. The formal administrative logs at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace remained entirely silent, unaware that a critical historical document had moved across the country outside their oversight. Even more troubling for Central Palace officials was a specific, calculated warning embedded within the second page of the text. Diana disclosed the existence of a hidden personal repository containing over 200 original letters, private journal entries, and internal communications kept entirely outside the royal archives at Windsor Castle. She informed Anne that she had placed this material in a secure, independent location as a protective measure, instructing her personal trustees to release the full archive to the public if the central administration ever attempted to completely sever her access to her sons following the upcoming autumn school term. The revelation that an unvetted historical repository existed outside palace control sent shockwaves through the household legal apparatus. This secondary repository was constructed with meticulous foresight. Recognizing that private letters and diaries could be easily seized, impounded, or restricted under official privacy rules if stored within traditional royal residences, Diana had coordinated with a small circle of trusted non-royal advisors to establish an off-site archival safety net. The document explicitly noted that key legal documents, private notes detailing internal household confrontations, and personal correspondence spanning over a decade had been logged, copied, and placed under strict multi-signature escrow conditions. If the central household moved to execute the administrative trap regarding her children, the release protocols for this entire vault would be automatically triggered. The shadow of this undisclosed vault hung over Clarence House like an imminent storm. Senior legal advisors spent hours attempting to map out the potential geographic coordinates of this secondary repository, cross-referencing old Spencer family real estate holdings, private banking institutions in the City of London, and private legal firms in Fleet Street. Yet every avenue led to a dead end. Diana had designed the escrow agreement with complex third-party execution clauses, ensuring that no single individual, not even her closest confidants, held the complete combination of access codes and physical keys required to unseal the vault prematurely. The palace was not merely facing the exposure of a single letter. They were standing on the brink of a massive, systematic unraveling of decades of internal household records. To make the scenario even more dramatic, behind closed doors, Princess Anne had quietly kept her own duplicate copy of this precise letter locked inside a fireproof, military-grade combination safe in her study at Gatcombe Park for exactly 30 years. Hidden beneath layers of private land records and personal logs, the document had remained completely untouched by palace archivists or household surveyors through decades of public commentary and media speculation. Princess Anne had borne the emotional weight of Diana's desperate plea in complete dignified silence, authorizing 0 press statements and granting 0 interviews, while quietly adjusting her official charity calendar between 1997 and 2005 to consistently spend time with William and Harry at Windsor, providing the exact protective buffer Diana had begged her to assume. Inside Princess Anne's private study at Gatcombe Park, the heavy combination safe remained an untouchable sanctuary of private royal history. While authors, journalists, and self-proclaimed royal experts published hundreds of books detailing the inner dynamics of the royal family, Anne never dropped a hint, never corrected a false narrative, and never engaged in public self-defense. She viewed the letter not as a political weapon or a tool for personal reputation management, but as a solemn binding trust delivered directly from a mother in distress. Year after year, as official royal biographers reinforced the false narrative of a cold, distant relationship between the two women, Anne silently maintained her post, visiting the young princes during their school breaks and offering them an unyielding, grounded presence away from press intrusion. The absolute silence maintained by Princess Anne across 3 turbulent decades represented a masterclass in institutional iron willpower. Think about the sheer number of global media firestorms that erupted between 1997 and the present day. The endless tell-all memoirs, the unauthorized biographies, the leaked audio recordings, and the televised documentary series that claimed to expose every secret of the House of Windsor. Through every single one of those media cycles, as commentators speculated endlessly about what really happened behind closed doors during the summer of 1997, Princess Anne walked past television crews and royal reporters without shedding a single tear or making a single off-the-record comment. She sat at her roll-top desk in Gloucestershire, knowing that less than 3 feet away from where she handled daily agricultural correspondence, the light blue Kensington Palace letter lay undisturbed, preserving the raw truth that the rest of the world was desperately trying to guess. When the news of the letter was officially released, the administrative network inside Buckingham Palace was effectively gridlocked as hundreds of internal staff simultaneously accessed the digital scans uploaded to archival servers. Scheduled press releases and routine diplomatic announcements were halted immediately. A major public relations campaign intended to highlight Queen Camilla's upcoming state charity appearances was abruptly frozen and locked back in the archives, as senior media directors realized the public would react with severe hostility to lifestyle updates while reading about Diana's final written warnings. The internal digital gridlock mirrored the total strategic paralysis gripping the Palace Communications Directorate. In offices across the palace complex, senior advisors huddled around computer screens in complete disbelief, reading the verbatim text of Diana's writing. The carefully scheduled media calendar, planned months in advance to showcase continuous institutional stability, collapsed in a matter of hours. Press officers tasked with responding to international media inquiries found themselves stripped of their standard talking points. They could neither deny the authenticity of the handwriting nor construct a credible defense for the decades-old administrative plans exposed in the letter. Inside the central press office at Buckingham Palace, the phones rang without a single second of interruption. International correspondents from Tokyo, New York, Sydney, and Paris demanded formal responses to specific sentences written on the second page of the manuscript. Junior press officers, trained to deliver polished, neutral statements about upcoming royal engagements, sat frozen at their desks, holding receivers against their ears while looking towards senior directors for guidance that never came. The central media monitoring wall, typically displaying balanced coverage of royal visits and charitable patronage updates, was entirely dominated by live news feeds broadcasting high-resolution close-ups of Diana's black rollerball handwriting, Every phrase was being analyzed in real time by legal scholars, constitutional experts, and historians, leaving the palace's traditional PR machinery entirely overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Prince William firmly rejected a drafted palace statement that sought to downplay his mother's words or dismiss them as historical friction. During a tense internal communication with his father's private office, William stated clearly that he would not permit his staff to spin or minimize his mother's original writing. He emphasized that he respected the absolute non-disclosure his Aunt Anne had maintained for 3 decades to protect his childhood, effectively leaving the Central Palace administration isolated and fully exposed to public examination. Prince William's decisive intervention underscored a dramatic generational shift within the leadership of the monarchy. Sitting in his private office at Adelaide Cottage, the Prince of Wales made it unequivocally clear to the King's senior advisers that the era of defensive media manipulation was over. He refused to allow any official attempt to characterize his mother's written words as hysterical, misplaced, or irrelevant. By explicitly endorsing Princess Anne's quiet conduct over 30 years, William signaled that his loyalty lay with the truth of his upbringing and the genuine protection provided by his aunt, rather than with the corporate PR apparatus of the central household. The confrontation between Adelaide Cottage and Clarence House marked a historic turning point in how the modern royal household responds to internal crisis. Senior advisers had prepared a draft statement filled with carefully chosen diplomatic phrasing, attempting to classify the 1997 letter as an understandable byproduct of a highly emotional and stressful period in royal history. They wanted William to sign his name alongside his father's, presenting a united institutional front that would effectively neutralize the document's impact. But William's refusal was immediate, sharp, and absolute. He instructed his personal private secretary to inform all palace departments that any staff member attempting to leak negative briefings against Earl Spencer or Princess Anne would face immediate dismissal. The reaction among senior court veterans was one of profound disorientation, as the traditional levers of institutional control failed to function. For decades, the Central Press Office relied on a proven strategy of delay, distraction, and subtle counterbriefing whenever inconvenient historical details surfaced. Yet in this instance, faced with a forensically verified document, the quiet endorsement of Princess Anne, and the direct refusal of Prince William to cooperate in a cover-up, the palace bureaucracy was forced into total silence. The internal machinery that Diana had once described as an unyielding administrative board was completely paralyzed by the simple power of her own preserved words. The atmosphere within the private corridors of Clarence House reflected the heavy burden of an unavoidable reckoning. King Charles sat alone in his private study, reviewing the forensic report provided by the London Probate Archives alongside a transcript of the letter. The legal advisers who had spent the previous evening searching for statutory loopholes now stood near the doorway, offering no further suggestions. There were no press strategies left to draft, no legal injunctions to file, and no counter-narratives to push. The monarch understood that the document was not merely an attack on an old administrative framework. It was a voice speaking directly from the past, calling out the institutional coldness that had driven a wedge through his family decades earlier. The scene across major media institutions in London reflected the magnitude of the revelation. Television networks preempted routine programming to feature extended live broadcasts from outside the gates of Buckingham Palace and Althorp House. Historical commentators who'd spent decades characterizing Diana and Anne as polar opposites were forced to admit on air that their foundational assumptions were completely wrong. Front pages of national newspapers were hastily reformatted to showcase full-length images of Diana's distinct rollerball script, accompanied by analysis detailing how Princess Anne had quietly carried out her sister-in-law's final request away from the public gaze. Broadcasting studios in London and New York brought on document archivists, handwriting experts, and former palace security officers to break down every sentence of the light blue letter. Journalists who had built entire careers writing books about royal rivalries found themselves scrambling to explain how a secret alliance of this magnitude could remain completely hidden for 30 years. On live television, veteran reporters noted that while the press had been distracted by public appearances and choreographed palace events throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, the real story of protection and survival had been playing out quietly in the rural fields of Gloucestershire and the private pathways of Windsor Great Park. As night fell over London, the public response took on a somber, reflective tone. Outside the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, people gathered quietly, discussing the incredible revelation of silent loyalty that had played out behind palace walls for 30 years. Public opinion polls conducted within hours of the release showed an overwhelming wave of respect for Princess Anne, whose dedication to duty was now understood to include a deeply personal, hidden protection of her young nephews during their most vulnerable years. The public recognized that while palace officials operated with corporate strategy, Princess Anne had operated with quiet, unshakable integrity. The gathering outside the palace gates was like typical media spectacles or public demonstrations. There were no loud protests or chaotic crowds. Instead, hundreds of people stood in quiet groups under the glow of the streetlights, holding evening newspapers featuring full-page reproductions of Diana's handwriting. Small bouquets of flowers were placed gently near the iron railings, reminiscent of the tributes left 3 decades prior, but this time accompanied by handwritten notes thanking Princess Anne for her 30 years of silent vigilance. The public had seen past the institutional machinery, recognizing that amidst all the court politics and media warfare, a true bond of family protection had endured. Inside the quiet walls of Althorp House, Charles Spencer returned the authenticated light blue manuscript to its velvet-lined mahogany chest, locking it once again within the secure family vault. The document had accomplished what 30 years of legal battles, public relations campaigns, and official histories could never achieve. It restored the true voice of Princess Diana, illuminated the extraordinary silent courage of Princess Anne, and permanently dismantled the false narratives constructed by the palace machinery. As the heavy oak doors of the Althorp Library closed for the evening, the peaceful quiet of the Northamptonshire countryside returned to the Spencer estate. The iron key was removed from the brass lock, and the mahogany chest was returned to its secure place beneath the foundation stones, but the world outside had been permanently changed. The document was no longer a hidden secret waiting to be found. It was now an immutable part of global history, permanently registered in the public archives and etched into the collective memory of millions. Outside the iron gates of Buckingham Palace and across the United Kingdom, crowds gathered to read printed transcripts of Diana's sloping handwriting, with public sentiment overwhelmingly praising Princess Anne's silent loyalty and protective role. The quiet discovery inside the library at Althorp House did not merely add a footnote to modern history. It permanently neutralized 30 years of calculated narrative management with a single sheet of paper, proving that the bond between Princess Diana and Princess Anne was built on deep trust, shared duty, and an unwavering commitment to protect the future of the monarchy.